Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village Centenary by Miss Reed. We are in April. "Heard the latest?" inquired Mr. Willett the next morning. "About the vicar?" Elevated to rural dean, broken a leg, off on holiday? All these dramatic possibilities leapt to mind before Mr. Willett spoke again. "He's going to keep bees. I only hope he knows what he's letting himself in for. My old gran had 3 of those straw skep hives on an old table by her bottom hedge, and by gum you didn't dare go near 'em to side the grass or pick a few runner beans nearby. Fair vicious they was." "I expect he's gone into all that." "I doubt it. Mr. Maughan's been egging him on, and got him a couple of hives from some chap over at Bent who's given up. Seen the light, I reckon. Why, I remember getting some of my gran's bees up my jersey as a kid and having swellin's like puddin' basins." "They tell me that's good for rheumatism." Mr. Willett snorted. "Them old wives' tales. My gran had rheumatic something terrible, and I bet she was stung often enough. She still told them old bees all that went on, like you hear about. She told them about Granddad dying in Caxley Hospital of the dropsy, and about the grandchildren being born. Funny, really. People say bees are wise, but the more I hear about 'em, the more I wonder. Did you know they goes for people dressed in blue?" "No, never heard of it." "No, nor I bet you haven't heard as they don't like compost heaps, nor bonfires, or mowing the grass, or a lot of other things you find in a garden. Pesky little objects. I don't envy the vicar, that I don't." "But think of all the lovely honey," I said. "Bet you $1 they'll be getting rape honey. Mr. Roberts usually has a good field of that. You know, that blazing yellow stuff." I said I knew what rape looked like. I had not lived in the country all these years without Mr. Willett interrupted me. All right, all right. All I'm saying is that the vicar will have to take his honey off smartish if it's rape, or it'll gum up the whole works. Terrible stuff to extract, as my old gran could tell him if she'd been spared. No, he don't know what he's letting himself in for, and I only hope he's got a blue bag for banging on the stings." "Can you still get a blue bag?" "I doubt it," said Mr. Willett. He sighed and moved off. After a few steps he stopped and called across the playground. "Hope you aren't thinking of starting bees," he shouted. "That's one thing I'm not helping you with, I can tell you." During the last day or two of term, I turned over in my mind the snippets of history I had learned from Dolly Clare. Somewhere here there was the theme for our centenary celebration, I felt sure. To give Miss Briggs her due, the idea of dressing the children in the costume of 1880 had some merit. Perhaps we could have just 2 children in costume telling Fairacre School's story in each decade. Or, more practically, a boy and girl of each of the 5 reigns, 6 if you included Edward VIII, through which the school had passed, suitably apparelled for their particular narrations. It would be best if we could let the whole school take part, and perhaps a song or poem typical of each period could be interspersed with the narration. I discussed my nebulous ideas with Miss Briggs, who seemed remarkably cooperative for once. Perhaps her impending holiday in France was having a stimulating effect. "Have you fixed a date?" she inquired sensibly. "Sometime in the first week in December," I told her, "and for 2 performances definitely, otherwise we shan't have room for everyone. I thought parents of infants one afternoon and the others the next." "What a good idea! And perhaps we could combine it with the tea party the children usually give at Christmas." "That's a thought," I agreed. The Christmas party for parents, with the children acting as hosts, is a long-standing tradition in the school. Sometimes we are hopelessly overcrowded. Dividing the party into a 2-day event might help considerably. I looked at my assistant with new respect. At times she was quite bright, I thought. "Of course, there's heaps of time for making arrangements," she said. "We'll have to start pretty early," I assured her. "We must know what we propose to do next term so the mothers can think about costumes. And it looks to me as though the whole of the autumn term will be devoted to rehearsing whatever we decide upon." "Let's hope the dormer window will be done by then," said Miss Briggs, watching the steady drip dropping into the wastebasket on my desk. "It had better be," I said grimly. Mercifully, the rough weather subsided as suddenly as it had arrived, and the last day of term ended in a clear, serene evening. Its blissful tranquillity matched my own feelings. The empty school basked in the golden rays of the setting sun. The rook's cawing was the only sound above the tidy playground, and Tibby and I sauntered in the garden relishing our solitude. The narcissi wafted heady draughts of fragrance toward us. The grape hyacinths were a sea of blue in the shrubbery, and some fine scarlet tulips, straight as guardsmen, towered above them. What if the groundsel and dandelions and chickweed were making steady progress? With the holidays ahead, I could soon root them out. The hooting of a car horn brought me back to earth, and I found Amy at the door. "I've been shopping in Oxford," she said, "and thought I'd call on my way home. Is it convenient, or are you having a cocktail party or anything?" "Don't be funny," I begged her. "Whenever have you caught me preparing for a cocktail party?" "You never know," replied Amy vaguely. "How pretty your garden looks." We strolled happily around my small plot, enjoying the unusual calm and warmth. "Do you want to see my new purchases?" inquired Amy, so we made our way back to the house. She dived into the car and emerged with 2 exotic-looking dress boxes, which she carried into the house. There seemed to be half a hundredweight of tissue paper in each one, but at last the garments were revealed. One was a set of glossy underwear, petticoat, knickers, and brassiere in what was called, in my youth, oyster satin. The other was a stunning 3-piece in silk jersey, cream in color, with delicate gold decorations at hem and neck. "Well," I exclaimed, "they are all truly gorgeous." "So they should be at the ghastly price I had to pay for them. Now I'm beginning to wonder if they are a trifle young for me." "Rubbish," I told her. "You're a very good-looking woman, as you well know, and can wear anything. You always could." "So could you, my dear," said Amy kindly. "You were really quite pretty at 18 when we first met." "Everyone is quite pretty at 18, I retorted. "A few decades later it is really quite enough to be clean and respectable, and I only hope I'm that. Anyway, I have no doubt you would tell me soon if I weren't." Amy laughed and began putting the clothes back among the tissue paper. "Are you going away?" she asked. "Not this holiday. At least I haven't booked anything. I might slope off to Devon for a few days and hope to find bed and breakfast somewhere." "You'll be lucky. You really should organize yourself better. I'm always scolding you about it." "You are indeed," I agreed, pouring her a glass of sherry. "You know, even the simplest holiday needs to be arranged well in advance. James and I are having a few days in the Scillies at the end of the month, and we booked the hotel and the helicopter flight across from Penzance way back in January." "Well, you're well-organized people, and I'm not. With James so terribly busy, we simply have to plan things, or we'd never get a break together. We propose to sleep, sunbathe, birdwatch, and eat." "Sounds heavenly," I said. "I'll do it myself one day when I can get around to arranging a holiday 6 months in advance." "I hope to live to see that day," said Amy, putting down her empty glass. "Well, I must be off. I'm glad you approved my purchases." She looked rather sadly at my cardigan. "How long have you had that shapeless garment?" "About 6 years, and don't suggest I give it to a jumble sale. It's pure wool and hand-knitted by dear Mrs. Willett. What's more, it's got pockets, which mighty few garments have these days, and I shall wear it till it drops into rags." "That won't be long," Amy assured me, and drove off. May. This is easily my favorite month, and I greeted its arrival by remembering to say "white rabbits" aloud before uttering another syllable. This childish superstition, told me first by fellow 6-year-olds, is supposed to bring you luck for the rest of the month. When discussing such matters now, I tend to pooh-pooh the whole field of folklore, astrology, horoscopes, and the rest of it, but I find myself hastily throwing spilt salt over my shoulder, dodging ladders, and, if not in polite company, spitting in a ladylike way if I see one magpie. Fortified by my white rabbits incantation, I got up and hung out the bedroom window to relish the perfection of a May morning. The copper beech was in tiny leaf, which spread a rosy gauze over the tracery of bare branches. Dew shimmered on the grass, and drops of moisture on the hawthorn hedge sparked 100 miniature rainbows. Out in Mr. Roberts' clover field a pheasant squawked. It was probably an anxious mother warning her chicks of the dangers that lurked around. Somewhere high above, a lark was vying with another in the distance, the song pouring down from the blue in drops of pure music. The air was cool and deliciously scented with hyacinth and narcissi from the garden bed below. Later it would be hot, and with luck I should be able to take my tea into the garden after my day's work and relish the joy of growing things. I remembered with immense pleasure that there was nothing in the diary for the evening of May the 1st. What bliss! As I dressed, I pondered the problem of loneliness. I received a great deal of unnecessary sympathy for my single state, and I am touched by kind people's concern for the fact that I live alone. If they only knew. I find it much more exhausting to share my home with friends who come to stay, much as I love them, and the places I visit I remember much more clearly and with keener affection when I have visited them alone. I suppose that this is because one wanders about looking at objects which are of particular personal interest and absorbing their aspect and history without the distraction of a friend diverting one's attention to something which she has discovered. No doubt it tends to make one extremely selfish, but such solitude has its compensations. For one thing, it is possible to pursue a train of thought or to carry out a piece of work unmolested. I heartily sympathize with widows and widowers who are used to a shared life and suffer horribly when it is shattered. The fact that so many of them adjust relatively quickly to the situation is indicative of their bravery. The fact that others never really recover is understandable. But as a spinster, I have never been called upon to try to mend a broken life, and I am deeply grateful for that mercy. Amy's many attempts to marry me off have failed, I like to think, largely because of my contentment with my lot. It would be unsupportable, of course, to think that the men were lukewarm. The postman arrived as my egg was boiling. He brought a 6-page document from the office about the necessity for stringent economics in schools, and a glossy circular exhorting me to invest in a gold pendant which could be mine for rather more than 2 months' salary. The latter went into a waste-paper basket, and the former I resigned myself to reading when I felt stronger. But not this evening, I told myself, taking a refreshing look at the shimmering glory outside. The 1st of May was going to be devoted to savoring its hope and beauty. The Caxley Festival began to loom large. An enormous amount of organization had gone into its arrangements, and the Caxley Chronicle carried copious advance notices of the pleasures in store and the absolute necessity of sending early for tickets, not forgetting the stamped addressed envelope for their return. Although Fairacre was only on the edge of these stirring events and was spared the feverish activity in the market town itself, yet even so we had our small part in the excitement. The gardens, which were to be open on the first Saturday and Sunday of the month, were being tended with unnatural fervor. Mr. Willett, whose garden is always in a state of perfection, was somewhat scathing about these unseemly efforts. "There's no call for panic," he told me, "if you keeps the hoe going regular. Some of these people is going fair demented. Why, I heard as that new couple at the other end of the street is planting out their geraniums, pots and all, from the greenhouse, just to make a show. It's a scandal, I reckon, and if there's a sharp frost, as can often happen in May, they've lost a lot." He puffed out his mustache in disgust and moved off about his business. Mrs. Pringle was equally censorious when she arrived. "Never saw so much fuss in all me borns," she said, chins quivering. "Did you know that Mr. Maughan borrowed Mr. Hale's electric shears to tidy up his yew hedge and nearly killed hisself by cutting through the cable?" I expressed my concern. "Oh, he's come to no harm," shrugged Mrs. Pringle. "But if he hadn't got into this fever, it never would have happened. And they say the vicar's now worrying about people disturbing his new bees and wishing he hadn't offered to open his garden at all. These ear festivals can cause a mint of trouble, it seems." "They sometimes raise a mint of money," I pointed out, and waited for the expected answer. "As my dear mother used to say, money isn't—" Linda Moffat burst in upon Mrs. Pringle's mother's well-known maxim to tell us the youngest Coggs had locked himself in the lavatory and was yelling for help. I went to supply it. So often was my attention drawn to the Caxley Festival that I was not in the least surprised to hear Amy's voice on the telephone and confidently awaited news about some festival plans. I was surprised to find that it was something entirely different that she had in mind. Am I right in thinking that in these decadent days you get a whole week's holiday around what in our youth was known as Whitsun? That's right. Spring Bank Holiday is its official name, and it starts at some time at the end of the month, and I believe we go back to school on Monday the 3rd. Maybe it's the 4th. I've mislaid my diary. Mislaid your diary? Squeaked Amy, profoundly shocked. What on earth will you do? It'll turn up, I said vaguely. I may have chucked it into the wastepaper basket with some other rubbish, or I may have left it in the post office. I shall have a look today sometime. I have never met such a wholly lackadaisical person in my life, scolded Amy. Why, if I were so careless as to lose my diary, I should be absolutely daunted. Life would have to stop until I'd found it again. My life will tick over quite well without it for a day or two, I assured her. What's the news? Not very good, I'm afraid. James has muddled his dates and now finds it impossible for him to come to the Sillies at the end of the month. He has some engagement in Canada then, and we both wondered if you would like to come with me instead. What do you think? We were to go on the Sunday, stay overnight at Penzance, and then fly across on the Monday morning. Do say you can come. It sounds blissful. How long for? We had planned to come back on Thursday or Friday, so you'd have time to do any chores before school started again, if that's in your mind. I thought rapidly. I could not think of any particularly pressing engagement during that week, but without my diary it was difficult to be sure. I said as much to Amy, thanked her sincerely for an exciting invitation, and promised to set about searching for my missing diary immediately. I'll ring you the minute it's found, I assured her. And make the answer yes, said Amy, and rang off. The first 2 or 3 days of May had been deliciously balmy, and we all told each other how lovely it would be if it lasted over the weekend. Visions of sun-tanned visitors in summer frocks sauntering about the newly spruced Fairacre Gardens kept most of us happy, but 1 or 2 pessimists shook their heads sadly. To my alarm, Mr. Willett was one of them. He is such an accurate weather prophet that I viewed his forebodings seriously. The sky was cloudless on Friday afternoon, and I only hoped that this time he might be wrong in his weather forecast. But sure enough, when I watched the weatherman on television that evening, some ominous whirligigs like well-spun spiders' webs hovered unpleasantly near the west coast and would bring rain and strong winds to the entire country. It was small comfort to learn that the weather would be more severe in the north than the south. The hardy types up there can take it, I thought callously, turning to our own dispiriting outlook, which affected my feelings much more sharply. I woke very early on Saturday morning. It was about 5 o'clock, and sure enough, a steady rain splashed along the gutters and dripped from the trees. From the look of the garden, it had been pouring for several hours. 6 sparrows splashed energetically in a large puddle by the box edging. The bird bath was full to the brim, though not being used for its right purpose by any of my bird friends. The trees glistened, the rooftops dropped miniature cascades onto those below, and some of the roses already drooped their heads heavy with moisture. I decided to make myself a cup of tea and take it back to bed. Delicious Saturday morning, despite the rain, when I could call my time my own. Tibby burst through the cat flap on the kitchen door as I poured my tea, and rubbed her sopping wet, bedraggled body round my bare legs, ignoring my vituperation in an ecstasy of love. To salve my conscience and to give myself time to get safely upstairs with my precious cup, I hastily put down some pussy love and hoped she might mistake it for liver. Hunched comfortably against the pillows, I surveyed the steaming window over my cup. Would this rain stop? If not, would it be possible to postpone the opening of the gardens? And if so, how could it be advertised? I knew that a lot of people had planned to come from some distance to support the project. It was too bad. I remembered that Irene Umbleditch and David Maughan were to be among our new visitors, and looked forward to hearing their news. My mind went back to the time when David's unhappy little boy Simon spent a short time at Fairacre School. He would be away at boarding school now, and I wondered if we should ever meet again. The rain continued all the morning, and by noon a nasty little wind had got up and was blowing the rain diagonally across the countryside. The sky was of uniform grayness. It was like being in a canvas tent, and the chances of a break in the clouds seemed non-existent. The gardens were to be open from 2 o'clock until 8 on both Saturday and Sunday, and I knew that several coachloads of people were expected from Caxley. At 2 o'clock I donned Wellingtons, my stoutest mackintosh, and a rain hat that made me look like a witch, and set off bravely to do the rounds, or until exposure sent me home again. It was heartening to see how many other people were doing the same. We met under umbrellas, in porches, under trees, anywhere to escape the relentless rain, and admired the dripping and battered beauty before us. A wonderful sense of camaraderie united us as we sloshed our way around, and I was delighted to meet the Mauns, their new nephew and his bride-to-be Irene, acting as hosts to the brave visitors in their garden. They gave me good news of Simon. He's settled down very well now and may move up next term. He's made friends with a pair of twins, two solid, matter-of-fact youngsters who are marvelous ballast for our volatile Simon, said David. We hope to take all three away in the summer if their parents agree. Henry Maughan espied Miriam Quinn alone in the distance and hurried to bring her over to meet his nephew. Once they were in conversation over a rare shrub of Henry's, I excused myself and splashed my way homeward. To my surprise, the clock said 4:30. It was no wonder I was wet. My expensive mackintosh had let water through the shoulders. My hair was plastered to my head by pressure from the ugly rain hat. My feet were soaked as the rain had run down my legs into my Wellingtons, but I was aglow with a sense of duty well done. In this complacent and self-congratulatory state, I decided to treat myself to a small fire on such a cheerless day. Whether the chimney was damp, which was understandable, or whether the wind was in the wrong direction, no one could say, but the result was unpleasant. Clouds of acrid smoke blew into the room. My visions of the small but bright wood fire beloved by novelists vanished in 3 minutes flat. As I set about opening windows, holding up newspapers over the fireplace to assist the right sort of draught, and cursing generally while my smug feeling of virtue rapidly evaporated. Trust fate to deflate one's ego. Well, we'll find out what more May in Fairacre has to offer next time.